and welcome to Genius 100% Summer in the Mediterranean with Tori Avey. I'm Hilary Viner, CEO of Genius 100 Foundation. On behalf of the extraordinary Genius 100 team, founder Rami Kleinman, Global Ambassador Ido Aharoni, and Chief Community Officer Helen Hatzis, thank you so much for making the time to join us, either for the first time or again, for this very special Genius 100 event. Genius 100 Foundation brings together accomplished, compassionate minds to reimagine the future and improve our world. We're a North American-based nonprofit organization whose purpose is to provide funds and support to under-resourced humanitarian and environmental initiatives and NGOs in geographies around the globe. We are delighted and honored to see so many members of the Genius 100 community and so many fans of our very special guest, Tori Avey, here today. We want to give a special thank you to series sponsor, BST Canada, and Ala Tanous, founding member of our community and president of Genius 100 Foundation Canada and global board member, for your generous support of our Genius 100 webinars. And I just want to mention and remind everyone that over the next hour, you'll be listening and learning on Zoom. Each and every one of us has different technology, so the sound may vary, especially during some of the video segments. We apologize in advance, but after today's event, you'll receive an email with a link to the presentation, as well as a link to all the recipes that are included in today's program. Now, on to today's extraordinary event. I think it's safe to say today's topic includes two things most of us just love: food and summer. And we are so fortunate to have Tori with us today. And for those of you who have not met her, you're in for a wonderful treat. Here's a short video to give you a taste of what's to come.
Hello, my name is Tori Avey. I'm a food writer, recipe developer, and the creator of ToriAvey.com. Since childhood, I've been fascinated by the distant shores of the Mediterranean and the meals that are served there. A lot of this interest was sparked by my grandparents, Lois and Clarence Avey, who spent the 1970s traveling Europe in a VW bus with a kerosene-fueled kitchenette. Then I met my husband, who was born on the Middle Eastern side of the Mediterranean, and my culinary world expanded to include a whole new array of amazing flavors. Exciting food, a bit of history, and a lot of love. That's the recipe for my website, which now reaches millions of people around the world each year, including you. So welcome. I hope you find something here that makes your life a little more delicious.
So before I formally introduce Tori, let me tell you what is on the menu for today. Here's a rundown. After we welcome Tori, she and I will begin to talk about her inspirations, and she'll take us on a journey through a delicious Mediterranean meal from starter through dessert. And here's where you come in. We'll be fielding questions from the audience at the conclusion of Summer in the Mediterranean. So please don't forget to submit questions via the option located in your Zoom panel. At the conclusion of the Q&A, I'll be back, close things out, and share some You Heard It Here First special announcements. So let's get started. So Tori, who just popped in, is a food writer, recipe developer, and the creator of ToriAvey.com, which reaches her millions of followers around the globe that look to her for food and lifestyle inspiration. She explores the story behind the food, why we eat what we eat, how the foods of different cultures have evolved, and how yesterday's recipes can inspire us in the kitchen today. Known as a food anthropologist, she carefully researches the history of every dish she covers, putting recipes within the context of the time period, ethnicity, and family traditions where they originated. Tori specializes in adopting historical recipes for the modern kitchen, while telling the stories behind those recipes, allowing readers to recreate and enjoy the flavors of the past. Her writing and photography have appeared on the websites of PBS Food, CNN, Bon Appetit, Zabar's, Williams-Sonoma, Yahoo Shine, and many others. She's been a featured guest on countless broadcasts, including Hallmark Home and Family, Inside Edition, The Today Show, Good Day New York, and many others. Tori is a member of the International Association of Culinary Professionals, the American Anthropological Association, the American Folklore Society, the Association for the Study of Food and Society, and the Culinary Historians of Southern California. In addition to all of that, Tori is a very active and longstanding member of the Genius 100 community. She's on our advisory board, wife of Genius 100 visionary Shuki Levy, and the mother of their wonderful magical daughter, Eliana Grace. So without further ado, live from LA, hi Tori.
Hi. Sorry, I popped in there a little early. I wasn't sure what was happening, but good to see you and welcome everybody. I'm so glad you're all here.
So we're very happy to have you. So the wonderful video we just watched gave us a glimpse of your inspirations. But when did you first become interested in cooking?
Oh gosh, I've been cooking since I was a very young child. I love being in the kitchen. I always have. I find cooking very creative and grounding. I just love it. And so when I was a kid, I would, rifle through my mom's cookbook collection and my grandma's recipe box to see what kinds of dishes I could create in the kitchen. And I would experiment and kind of taught myself a lot of what I know in terms of how to cook. And my grandparents were also a big influence on me early on in the food space because they did a lot of traveling in the 70s in the Mediterranean. And they had a VW bus with a little kerosene-fueled kitchenette, and they would travel all over to different countries, and they would bring back those flavor experiences with them. And when I was a kid in the 80s, they brought a lot of those recipes and dishes back to me and introduced them to me. So I was able to kind of learn about a whole culinary world beyond my small hometown. And it really got me excited about food from a very young age.
That is a really wonderful background. Like your grandparents were food pioneers.
I don't know about food pioneers, but they had an adventurous spirit and they loved food. More so, they loved history. They really, they gave me 3 bugs. They gave me cooking bug, the history bug, and the travel bug. All of those things I caught from them early on, interest in them, and they've followed me throughout life.
And it's wonderful. You've combined all 3 of those interests into your absolutely fantastic career and everything that you provide for millions of people around the world. That the combination of those 3 things it's a really wonderful tribute to them.
Thank you. Yes, I'm passionate about it. I love it.
It's wonderful to do things that you're passionate about. It just makes everything so much better. Never feels like you're really working. When and how did you first start writing about food?
Well, I've also been writing since I was a kid. I've always loved writing. I was a nerd early on. And for my 10th birthday, my present that I asked for was a typewriter. So I loved just writing stories. I was very imaginative as a kid. And so that was something that I've always kind of done and loved and also been passionate about. So it kind of was just a natural progression when I started doing more cooking and really getting into the kitchen more. I started getting very curious about the history and origins of the dishes, and I decided to start writing about those. So it was all a very natural progression, fueled by the PBS food column. When PBS Food approached me to do a column about food history, that really that got me more excited because I knew that people were reading and interested in this subject. It wasn't just me.
Wow. So what inspired your website?
Well, I started my website in 2010, and it was really more of a hobby when it started. I had gotten deeply into exploring the foodways of Israel because my husband, he wasn't my husband then, he became my husband over the time of the blog, but he was born in Israel. And so that's the Middle Eastern side of the Mediterranean. And he really, I wanted to recreate authentically the dishes that he enjoyed growing up. And he has a really interesting family background. He's half Sephardic, half Ashkenazi, and his father is actually from Crimea, and took years to make his way down to Israel. And the family picked up all kinds of recipes on the way to Israel. So they have just a really interesting, diverse food culture in their family that was fun to explore early on. And so I we would throw dinner parties and, have friends over, and I would cook for them because I just loved doing it. And I would always get asked, "Oh, I love this recipe. Can you write it down for me?" And finally I thought, let me just put it on a little blog. It'll be easy. I can put some pictures, because when I was learning how to cook, I didn't always know how to do every particular little thing that was asked of in a recipe. So I thought, let me break it down and make it very, very clear and simple for people, illustrate it. And, I'll share this with my friends and family. And again, this is 2010, which is pretty early in terms of food blogging. And some of the dishes that I blogged about, like shakshuka, for example, there weren't many people writing about it yet. And so Google started picking it up and paying attention to it. And suddenly people started stumbling onto my blog, my little hobby blog. And before long, it grew. It kind of took on a life of its own, to the point where now it's reaching tens of millions of people every year. So I didn't expect that. It really started as more of a fun thing, but I'm really grateful and gratified that people have, enjoyed it as much as they have, and that it's grown as much as it has over the years.
Well, that's because it has very authentic, well thought out, well planned content. And you really are, from the inside out, from a true passion from an early age, and an expert in Mediterranean cuisine, of actually going there, participating in it, learning from your grandparents, learning from your husband. So, we've all heard that the Mediterranean diet is very healthy. Can you fill us in a little bit about why that is?
It is. It is continually proven to be one of the most healthy ways of eating. And there are a lot of reasons for that. I think the biggest reason is a de-emphasis of red meat and a broader embrace of vegetables. The table is covered in vegetables and fruits, seasonal ingredients that are growing at any particular time of the year, that are rich in vitamins and nutrients. Olive oil is a huge part of the Mediterranean diet, which is great for heart health. And, when we're talking about proteins, fish is obviously a central protein in the Mediterranean diet, but even more so, I think, legumes, nuts, healthy plant-based fats, these are all really important components of the Mediterranean diet. But one component of the diet that I think is probably not talked about as much, but that I think is probably one of the most important health aspects of Mediterranean cooking and eating, is the emphasis on enjoying your meal. It's a really different culture in the Mediterranean when it comes to eating. And my husband and I are very much into the concept of how mind affects the body. And, how you process things in your mind can really affect your physical health. And so, in the Mediterranean, when you sit down to a meal, it's really more of a celebration. It's not like, I'm on a lunch break and I'm going to eat in front of my computer while I'm, answering some emails because I have to fit in more work. No, you really take a break and you really enjoy that meal, and you dine with friends and family. You might sip a glass of red wine, and you just really enjoy that food. And I think taking that time and those moments to let that food do what it's supposed to do. I have a friend who's a nutritionist, who's a personal nutritionist of mine, but she also works with me on the website. Her name is Lindsay Willen, and she talks about how when you approach food in a mindful way and you prepare the body to bring something into it that is good and positive, that your digestive enzymes work better, that you're going to digest that food in a more nutritious way, in a way that's going to affect the body physically in a positive way. So I think that that's a really important aspect of the Mediterranean diet that isn't talked about often enough. And it's this idea that food is a celebration. It's really something to be enjoyed.
I couldn't agree more. And I know many adults truly love the Mediterranean diet, myself included. It's my personal favorite. I had Greek food actually last night as soon as I got to New York.
My
Yeah, right. But what about children? I know you have a little one yourself. How do they like the flavors, or the concept of Mediterranean food versus what's, kind of considered children's food?
Sure. I can speak from my experience as an American mom. I obviously am probably not the typical mom in terms of what I put on my child's plate, because I am so interested in food and food culture. But in terms of what I feed my own 3-year-old, she loves it, and it's very healthy. Kids in our country tend to gravitate more towards blander foods, salty, sugary, things that aren't super nutritious necessarily, but they're comfortable to the palate. And I actually read an article recently that talks about why that is. There's actually science behind why kids kind of gravitate towards those food choices. But I think you can move away from that by putting very seasonal, colorful food on the plate. Whenever I make a meal for Eliana, I'm looking at what's in season and what is growing that is healthy right now, and what can I tempt her with in terms of color and texture and flavor, and really putting a lot of fresh options in front of her. And she always gets very excited to see what's on her plate for breakfast, lunch, or dinner, because she knows it's going to be something different and something colorful. She won't always eat everything on the plate. Kids are picky, don't get me wrong, and my toddler is no exception. She can be picky, but I think she eats a very healthy, well-rounded diet because I offer her a lot of seasonal, colorful options that do tempt her and make her excited to see what's on her plate.
That's great. I think it's really good to, to introduce those foods to children very early so they're not unusual when they become part of their diet later on. So
Yeah.
tell us about this Mediterranean summer menu that you put together. What inspired the menu and the recipe choices?
I'm really excited about this menu. This is one of my favorite things to do, actually, to put together menus that reflect the season and that are cross-cultural, meaning, I look at the Mediterranean as a body of water that connects all of these different countries and foodways, and they're so different. I mean, the cuisine of Spain is so different from the cuisine of Greece, from the cuisine of Turkey, Morocco. They all have very distinct cuisines, but they are connected in many ways because they all have a shared history with this Mediterranean body of water. And they also have ingredients that they share because they're from the same region and the weather is relatively similar in these areas. So this menu really draws on this idea of, taking the Mediterranean cuisine as a broader topic and bringing in, flavors from different parts of the Mediterranean that complement each other and go together, but that also are very unique and different. And I think it created a fun, exciting menu. Seasonality is a really important part of the Mediterranean diet. And it's also good for the environment to eat in a seasonal way because you're eating what's local. You can get ingredients for these dishes at the farmer's market and really just from your local farmers, see what's growing. And I think that's why I'm excited about this menu, because it's just so fresh and colorful and really seasonal and, can be made by anybody in any part of the world, but, will do best with seasonal, ripe, fresh ingredients.
Well, I'm really excited for you to take us through it because I've, of course, got a sneak peek, saw some of the videos, and everything looks absolutely delicious. So you've started with the menu with apple pepper gazpacho with tahini and chimichurri, which sounds really different. Can you tell us about it?
It's so different. Yeah. So this dish, first of all, I want to start a little bit on the history of gazpacho because it's got an interesting history. Cold soups like gazpacho actually have an ancient history. They go back quite far. There are mentions in ancient Greek and Roman texts about cold soups that are similar to gazpacho, but that don't have the tomatoes and peppers in them. Tomatoes and peppers actually came after Christopher Columbus's voyage to the New World. He brought back seeds and plants that the Mediterranean was not yet familiar with. So, we think of tomatoes as being so integral to, Mediterranean cuisine and peppers and thinking about those, like you can't make Italian food without tomatoes, right? Well, they really weren't there until, after Christopher Columbus discovered the New World. So early versions of gazpacho did not have tomato, but the ones that we're familiar with today do. There are also other chilled soups in Spanish cuisine. One is called ajo blanco that is made with, it's a soaked bread and garlic, and it's a white gazpacho type soup. There's also salmorejo, which is a thicker version. But gazpacho is the one that most of us are familiar with and know the most about. And what I love about gazpacho is it's great for summer. It doesn't require a lot of, any cooking really. And this particular one was inspired by a chef named Lucas Citri, who I met in the Shuk Jerusalem in Israel. He's actually an Argentinian chef who set up a beautiful little restaurant in the Shuk. And his version of gazpacho just floored me because it had so many different cultural influences in it, and it was so unique and interesting. He thickens the broth with challah, which is, Israeli Jewish bread. So we've got that Israel influence in there. We've obviously got Spain because it's gazpacho, and we've got some creamy tahini added as a garnish, which is just a lovely creamy addition that is Middle Eastern. And then he adds chimichurri, which is a spicy green salsa from Argentina. So it's really this awesome blending of traditions into something that is quite delicious. Oh, he adds apple too, which sweetens it just a bit. And you can actually see how it's made. I have a video if you want to show it.
That just looks absolutely fantastic. And I love to play around with Mediterranean food and making soups myself. And that is just such a unique and interesting blend of ingredients. I love that you put in both paprika and smoked paprika, because I feel like smoked paprika is always like the best little, almost like secret ingredient that gives it just that extra something.
Yeah, I love smoked paprika. You can definitely overdo it. You have to be careful with it, but it's great in small doses to give just a little bit of a smoky hint to something.
Yeah, it's delicious. That looked amazing. So the next dish on the menu is this really unique fish dish. Where did this recipe come from?
I love this dish. It's called pazili levrek sarma, and this is a Turkish dish. It came about with a collaboration with my friend Gamze Inachele, who is a Turkish cooking expert. And she lives in Turkey and has so much knowledge of Turkish food, more than anybody I know, really, about the history and origins of dishes. And so she introduced me to this concept of charred wrapped fish, which is very popular in Turkey and actually has been since Ottoman times. Foods wrapped in greens are very popular throughout the Mediterranean and Middle East. Most of you are probably familiar with stuffed grape leaves. So that would be like one version of this, but in Turkey, it's used for various entrees and to wrap various ingredients. And I love this idea of wrapping fish. And, I always try to include a fish dish on a Mediterranean menu just because, it's such an integral part of Mediterranean cuisine. But this is actually one that you can also make vegan really deliciously by just swapping out the fish for mushrooms. So it looks a little complicated, you'll see in the video. It might seem a little daunting, but it's really actually very simple and requires pretty minimal cooking. There's a little bit of stovetop saute, and you have to boil the leaves for a couple minutes just to make them soft. But other than that, you don't have to turn on an oven or anything like that. It's actually pretty simple. And the bechamel style sauce that you see on top is one that I created because a lot of these dishes in Turkey are are covered with a creamy sauce, with a dairy base. And I challenged myself to create that same flavor in a more nutritious way. And so I created this bechamel style sauce that is actually made from chickpea flour and olive oil. And it creates this really creamy, nice finish. It's got a whole grain mustard in it as well. And it just gives a really delicious touch to kind of bring the whole dish together. Inside the green wrap, you'll find sauteed sea bass. I like using a white oily fish for this, for the best flavor. And also some spicy chili peppers and some wonderful spices. I think the best way to describe it is just to show you the video, because it really walks you through kind of how it's made.
That looks absolutely fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a really interesting dish. I love it. And it's very seasonal because chard is a summer green and it's in season right now. So.
Oh, it just looks, it not only looks beautiful, it just looks like it would taste absolutely amazing. And because a lot of us that follow the Mediterranean diet eat a lot of fish, but usually just cook fish kind of in a more traditional way, but that looks absolutely terrific. So
yeah,
thank you for sharing that with us.
I was telling my husband I'm going to include this dish in this menu, and he said, does that mean we get to eat it again? Because he loves it. Every time I make it, he gets so happy.
I'm sure. So as a side dish, you featured a saffron couscous dish that's so beautiful to look at and colorful. What inspired this one?
So this one is really wholly inspired by the memory of my grandma, the one who traveled the Mediterranean. Her name was Lois, and she was a vegetarian for the later part of her life. My grandfather actually had a quadruple bypass in his 70s, and they really gravitated towards this Mediterranean style of cooking because of the heart health aspect of it. And they cut out all red meat and really were pretty much meatless in the later days of their lives. And so this is a vegetarian dish, but it has a lot of protein aspects to it. It's saffron. The yellow saffron spice is a very rare and it's an expensive spice because it's a precious spice. So it reminds me of my grandma because she was so unique and special and precious. And yellow happened to be her favorite color too. I included chickpeas for protein. I have pine nuts in there, and on one hand, they're added to give some healthy fat to the dish and texture and flavor. But they're also there because my grandma and my grandpa raised my father and his two brothers on a 1,000-acre ranch in the Sierra Nevada mountain range in Northern California, and it was covered with pine trees. So pine nuts remind me of that aspect of her personality. And then it's got lemon, which is just a bright, cheerful flavor, which was like her. She was bright and cheerful. And basil, they used to grow in their garden in the back of their home. And when I was a child, they would cook a lot of dishes with this fresh basil for me. So it really brings back so many memories of her, this dish. And I love it on this menu because it has some of the similar flavors from the other recipes that kind of tie into it, but it's a great dish for summer because, couscous is quick cooking. You just have to boil water and then it basically soaks it up and that's it. So you don't have to, slave over a hot stove to make this. And it can also be served warm as a side dish, but it can also be served at room temperature. It's great both ways. So it's great on like an outdoor buffet. If you want like a side dish that's not the typical, macaroni salad or something like that, this is a great alternative. And it's bringing together these flavors from Morocco. Couscous is a Moroccan dish. And actually my grandma introduced couscous to me for the first time in the 80s. I didn't even know what it was when I was a kid. There were no Trader Joe's in my area at that time. And, international foods, these were all new to me as a kid. So, trying couscous for the first time was a bit of a revelation for me because of the texture is so unique, these little balls of semolina. My grandma was a painter. She was an artist, and she used to talk about how couscous is like a palette that you can paint with flavor because it really soaks up whatever you put on it, and whatever sauce you add to it can enhance it and make it beautiful. So that's what this dish really is to me. It's really a reflection of her spirit. I have to tell you one more quick story about that dish because my grandma, like I said, was very adventurous, and my grandfather, and they did a lot of travel. And they actually went to Morocco in the 70s, and they tried couscous in Marrakesh for the first time. And they loved telling me the story of how they sat around, a communal table, and they were encouraged to eat with the right hand, and you eat with your hands. And so when she first served it to me, she said, "Eat with your hands." And I was shocked. My grandma's telling me to eat with my hands, but she said, "No, that's how you do it." So yeah, this really reminds me so much of her.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. That's a really special memory, and it just looks absolutely delicious. I can't. I'm like, I want to run into the kitchen and start making all this stuff right now.
Well, you know, I'll
So,
cook it for you. Come over.
okay, I'll zap myself right through. I'll hop across the country. No, maybe next week. Um, but finally, for a wonderful dessert, you're sharing the sweet strawberry granada. Am I saying that right? Granada?
Granita.
Granita. And
Yes.
it's really unique with some touches that make it really stand out. What are the origins of this one?
So granita is a dish that's very popular in Sicily. It's a Sicilian dish, and at this time of year, you can't walk around Sicily without encountering somebody at a cafe eating a granita. It's always served alongside a brioche type pastry, and it's this really icy, refreshing, sweet dessert. And I love it because it's actually super easy to make at home. You don't need any special equipment to make it, and it's got a fascinating history. So in Sicily and in this region, before refrigeration, it really started in the Middle Ages. Men would carry snow from Mount Etna in the winter, and they would store it in the back of these caves on the mountain where it would stay cold and frozen all the way through to the summer season. And then when it got hot enough and people wanted icy treats, they would send them down the mountains on donkey back in jute bags covered in straw to keep them cold until they would get to the populated areas. And they would use the snow that had been gathered to mix with honey and herbs and local flavors to make sweet treats for the summer, pre-refrigeration. In the 16th century, they created what's called a pozzetto, which is kind of like the modern version of an ice cream machine. And it's the old version of an ice cream machine. It's basically a zinc bucket that is put into a wooden cylinder. And in the space between the wooden cylinder and the zinc bucket, they would put snow and salt. And then whatever they put into the zinc bucket would freeze into a treat. And eventually a turn crank handle was introduced that put like a kind of like a spoon type device into the mixture that would keep it moving as it froze. And that's what kind of resulted in this really interesting texture, which we now call granita. It's sort of like a snow cone like texture. And you can make it at home. Again, you don't need any special equipment. All you really need is a food processor, a dish, and a fork. And the video will show you exactly how it's done. This particular granita has basil and pine nuts in it, which makes it very special.
I really can't wait to make this menu, and I'm sure so many other people watching are thinking the same thing.
I
So,
want to I want to mention a couple other
yeah,
things about the granita really quickly because
yeah,
the granita, you can adjust the sweetness level by trying the sweetness before you freeze it, and keeping in mind that freezing it actually will reduce the sweetness level that you're tasting in the fresh mixture. So if you like a less sweet dessert, you can kind of adjust to taste. Just know that what you're tasting before you freeze, it's going to be less sweet after it freezes. So that's one important thing. And the other thing that is very important is that you can add a splash of vodka to this and make it a tipsy dessert, which is really fun for summer.
that is a very, very good point. Thank you for sharing that with us. And in your recipes, do you have other fruit that you do that with? It looks like it would be delicious no matter what the base ingredient is.
Yes, it's a very adaptable recipe. So you can really use whatever fruit is in season as long as it's not too seedy. Although I guess strawberries have seeds, so it doesn't really matter too much. I wouldn't use something with bigger seeds. But yeah, you can pretty much use anything. I've done it with blueberries, peaches, really whatever you can find at the farmer's market that sounds like it would be good in a granita will generally work.
That's terrific. Like I said, I'm sure everyone is like really excited to try this to cook this menu at home. How do they access the recipes? I think it's here on the today's recipes
Yes.
download, and I think everyone's going to receive that in an email after this presentation as well.
Yes, I believe all the participants are going to be getting this link. It's on my site. It's toriavey.com/summer menu, and that will allow you to access the recipes and also other, great content from my website. If you're interested in continuing to receive it, you can do that as well.
Great. Well, I think we're going to turn it over to a couple of the questions. One is from Ellen Weiss, which I'm going to have to answer. For the fish dish, would
Yes.
you sub kale for chard? If you don't love mushrooms, what would you suggest as something to add to the fish?
Oh, great questions. Yes, you can sub kale for the chard. You're going to need to blanch it in the same way that you blanch the chard because you want the leaves to be very flexible and easy to bite through. And you would also want to make sure that you're cutting any thick stem off of the kale or whatever heavier green you're going to use. You want to make sure that those stems can be very kind of stiff and hard to bite through. So that's why we have this prep step of cutting through the stem and getting rid of most of that. You can definitely sub out the mushrooms. I would just do more fish in that case. Probably. I don't think. I guess you could. Trying to think what else I would use. I would probably just sub more fish, to be honest. And yeah, that's an easy sub. And like I said, the vegan version of that, you can just get rid of the fish and swap in all mushrooms if that's something you wanted to do to get rid of the fish.
Great.
Did I get
And
that
then
whole question?
I believe so. Ellen, if you have another follow-up to that question, please send it in. And also another substitution question for the couscous. Instead of chickpeas, would you use almonds or another nut or another bean or maybe edamame if you wanted to do a substitution?
Interesting question. I don't think I would sub edamame. It would kind of be a different flavor profile. I would probably use like a white cannellini bean in that case. I would use a legume, cannellini or maybe lima beans, but no, probably cannellini.
Cool. And then another question is, in general, how long would you say it takes to prepare one of your meals, like the one that you just took us through?
Oh, so it really depends on the menu and how intricate it is and involved. This one is fairly simple. I would say from start to finish, it depends on how much you want to do in advance and how much prep work. I try to do as much as I can ahead of time so that things are very easy on the day of. So pre-measuring my ingredients is a big thing. But I would say from start to finish, this might take an hour. Obviously, the granita takes freezing time, so you would need to take that into consideration as well in terms of prep. But generally speaking, I think the most complicated dish on this would be the fish dish. And once you get the hang of it, the first time it might take you a bit of time, but after that, it would be pretty easy, I think, to cook through.
So for the couscous, I got another question here. Can you make the couscous the night before and reheat it?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a great make ahead dish, but I would Definitely add the basil just before serving because basil tends to wilt, and the flavor is always the best with basil when you're able to slice it right before you serve it. That chiffonade slice just kind of releases the aroma and flavor of the basil, and you want that freshest right before you serve it.
I know basil's tricky. I sometimes buy it and it looks perfect, and then within it seems like moments it doesn't look the same anymore.
Yeah, it's easily bruised. Here's a tip. When you bring the basil home, if you want to, you don't want it bruised when you're cooking it. What I do is I fill the sink with a little bit of water, enough to cover it, cold water, and I just very gently lay the basil in the water and kind of agitate it just a bit, because the more you work with it, the more it gets that black bruising that is so unattractive, and it loses flavor when it bruises as well. So you want to try to avoid that. So putting it under that water very gently, kind of getting rid of any sediment that might be there. And then I use like a dish rack. I just lay it in a clean dish rack to dry and drip dry for about an hour. And that's the best way to keep it clean and fresh.
I know I love using basil, but it is quite delicate.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to thank you again, Tori. We're starting to wrap up here. You always enlighten us, and just listening and learning from you today has made me feel like I've been to the Mediterranean myself. The music and the videos are absolutely wonderful, and I hope everyone tuned in feels the same. So it looks, since we've just gone through our questions, I just wanted to kind of start to wrap things up, just to say that we're at the halfway point of the Genius of Webinar series. And we're thrilled with each and every one the audience is growing around the world. And thank you again to all of the people that tuned in today, that are fans of Tori's, like myself. So thank you again, Tori.
Thank
We
you so much.
invite each of you to become a Genius 100 Foundation supporter, so you can help us continue to provide funds and support to under-resourced humanitarian and environmental initiatives and NGOs and geographies around the world. And please stay tuned for an invitation to our upcoming Genius of the Future of Education report, which will be held on Thursday, August 11th at 12 noon Eastern. This report was originally crafted and presented at the Festival of the Diaspora inaugural event in San Juan earlier this year, in partnership with the Aspen Institute on Belonging and Tulsa Innovation Lab. It combines interviews with members of our Genius 100 visionary community from Afghanistan, Canada, India, Israel, Nigeria, and the US. All efforts from that event will support the Genius 100 Legacy Campaign to further the prolific work of Genius 100 visionary and spiritist, the late Sir Ken Robinson. For any information about any of the above, please go to our website and join our mailing list, or just be in touch via email with either Helen or myself. And thank you again, Tori. It was wonderful to see you today and have you participate in our webinar. I hope everyone enjoyed it as much as I did. And thank you, and see you next time.
Thank you, Hillary.